Welcome this morning to the Fireside Chat on commercial sexual exploitation of a minor, also known as CSEM, also known as domestic minor sex trafficking or human trafficking or just sex trafficking. So wanted to give you an overview of where we see CSEM cases in Tennessee. So here are the past 3 years, and you can see that there has been an increase. We've had each year more alleged child victims and more confirmed child victims of CSEM. Now, there is a small dip in 2020 from 2019, but I wanted to note that the number stayed really consistent between those 2 years, even when the department as a whole experienced between a 20 and 30% reduction in calls to the child abuse hotline because of COVID. So, law of statistics, there were probably more victims out there because of the limited visibility in the community, limited access to schools, people not going to get medical appointments. We were not getting as many of those phone calls through the course of 2020. Also wanted to note that it is widespread. 78 counties have reported cases to DCS. And it's not the same 78 counties from 2019 to 2020. There is shifts between that. So as more education and awareness goes out, as more industries are being trained and being brought into the fold of how they can prevent human trafficking, those numbers will continue to increase. So for the purposes of the Department of Children's Services, wanted to make sure that we all had a shared understanding of what the criteria for commercial sexual exploitation of a minor is. There does not have to be a third party. So we typically think of, we have a child that's being exploited, we have their trafficker who is then exploiting that child by bringing in somebody else, that third party, to actually give over something of value to the trafficker in exchange for access to exploit that child. But that is not always necessary. The buyer of the child can be the alleged perpetrator. They can both be the trafficker as well as the other party. Also, if we have an alleged child victim that is directly receiving the benefits of it, so that may be through survival sex, if they are homeless or on runaway and are accessing basic needs through human trafficking, that is considered commercial sexual exploitation of a minor. One of the street terms that you may hear is that they've gone renegade. So they do not have a trafficker, they do not have a pimp. They're putting themselves out there over Craigslist, the internet, different apps. Even in that situation, we treat that child as a child. We treat that child as a victim. The person who is then exploiting that child's vulnerability is the alleged perpetrator. So you do not have to have a third party, and in some cases, you do not have to have a traditional pimp or trafficker. There's not always a clear sexual component, especially at the beginning when we get reports to the child abuse hotline. For those of you who have worked these cases, it is not surprising. You know, they may have a boyfriend, they may have a friend, they may be in a hotel room, and everything is in cash. Everything is, you know, really out of sorts, but they're denying that, no, he's never touched me, we're just friends, because they know and have been coerced into denying any of those contacts, because that is a key thing that will get their trafficker arrested. So WorkAid 1 has been redefined to highlight those risk factors. These are some of them, these are not all of them, so that when a call comes into the child abuse hotline, if we're seeing these indicators, but we do not have an outcry of sex abuse, because again, they're going to deny it to stay out of trouble and keep their trafficker out of trouble, these may be screened in as CSEM for our purposes, especially if it's coming from one of our anti-trafficking organization partners or law enforcement partners. So WorkAid 9, there are two places currently in policy that talk about CSEM. There is a little bit in 14.7, but WorkAid 9 really goes through a lot of the nuts and bolts, the responsibilities and tasks when we are working one of these cases. Outlines the notifications, which includes the TBI human trafficking hotline, the anti-trafficking organizations. If there is a non-U.S. citizen child, we contact the federal government, and the purpose of that federal contact is they can help facilitate getting that alleged child victim a visa. There are two specific visas that have been carved out for victims of human trafficking. So that is not reporting somebody, that is not, an attempt to deport someone. That is actually trying to get them legal status to stay in the country, and so that they can be provided with the support that they need to come out of that trafficking environment. The WorkAid, while it is and lives in Chapter 14, it does detail some tasks for custodial cases as well as non-custodial cases, but we know that when a WorkAid or policy doesn't live in a unit's chapter online, it's less likely to be seen, but that is in there. And then it does provide some guidance on how to identify services and what that support, both from a provider standpoint as well as a medical and mental health standpoint. So there are additional tasks. So on the front end, these will be considered sex abuse. They will be considered severe. So you have your SIPIT notifications. And like I said, you will be notifying the TBI, the anti-trafficking organization in your area. So here are the three: Restore Core, End Slavery, and Grow Free, Tennessee, as well as OTIP, the Office of Trafficking in Persons for Foreign Nationals. These need to be made immediate up to 24 hours. And the purpose of that is these are not just check boxes that we want you to do. Notifying the TBI, notifying OTIP, those are legal requirements. But all of these notifications can help support you through the investigative process. TBI knows which areas have members of the Human Trafficking Task Force that have been specially trained, so who in your local law enforcement is your point person, because your normal SIPIT partner may not be that person. The local law enforcement may not have that capacity, and TBI takes that on, so TBI may be your primary SIPIT partner for law enforcement purposes. The anti-trafficking organizations may already have knowledge of this child. They may have been working with this child. They may have already been on the organization's radar. So there is a lot of information that they may currently have, as well as the TBI, that can inform our investigative steps as well as your safety. Is this somebody that has a violent trafficker? And we really do not need to be making contact. Law enforcement needs to be making that first contact with us so that they can secure the scene. But these agencies also have intervention specialists. They have survivors that are on their boards of directors as well as on staff, so that they can go and actually talk, whether in person or by phone, with the recovered youth and actually talk the talk. These are people that have been there, they've gone through it, they've come out of the life, and now they are trying to help others make that transition successfully. So when we go in, a lot of these youth will go, "You don't know what I've been through." For the most part, that's absolutely correct. But when they can liaise with somebody and talk to somebody who does know what they've been through and can show them that there is a life outside of this, the rapport is established, the trust is established, and we can leverage that to then undo that trauma bond that exists with their trafficker so that they can start the road to recovery and survivorship. They also will provide ongoing services past the age of 18. That can be housing, that can be job support, that can be networking with appropriate mental health providers and medical providers in the community. There's a lot of legwork that these anti-trafficking organizations can do for us. So when we call them, it's not, "Hey, I've been told I have to call you." It's, "Here's what I've got. What do you have? How do we work together?" It is a collaboration. It is not a just handoff or dump on them. It is a collaboration through this process, because we also know that just like on those initial contacts and calls to the hotline where we may not have that sexual component, when we follow up with a forensic interview, we need to be thinking through when is the timing of that and where is the child in their recovery, because you do it too early, they're still going to be in that resistant, trauma-bonded mindset that they're not going to give up any information. Through the work with the anti-trafficking organization, through that trust being built, then we can better time that forensic interview, and so we can have a full-blown, legally defensible, taped interview that the child is ready and willing to disclose that information, rather than going in and just saying, well, we did a forensic interview, but the child wouldn't talk to us. That is a waste of everybody's time. Well, some of you may be asking, why do I have to call more people? I hope I've explained that. And it's not just because I like making your lives more difficult. These are professionals that work in this day in and day out. We have designated TBI agents. We have expanded that. The TBI is training local law enforcement more intensely and setting up a task force model similar to the drug task force, so that we have SIPP partners on the local law enforcement level that are knowledgeable and ready to assist. They also have the ability to access and investigate technology, social media accounts, the dark web, in ways that we do not have access. So I hope that you now may have a better understanding of why you have to talk to more people, because otherwise we've got children that are, heavily exploited, usually compound trauma and complex trauma from the vulnerabilities that existed in the first place that allowed the traffickers to come in, and they leveraged that to exploit the child, and then the subsequent trauma of the sexual exploitation and all the other things that go on, often drug abuse, physical violence that takes place during that trafficking incident. So it's not a one or done. This is a lifelong process to undo this trauma and this hurt, and hopefully they set them up for survivorship so that they do not become re-exploited or have a situation where they do not have the resources, and then we see them struggling as parents themselves down the road. One thing that I really want to make clear to everybody: do not assume the home is safe. Do not assume that if you have a third-party trafficker or non-familial trafficker that we can just send that child home. That is absolutely the worst thing that you can do. Get that out of your head. Something was going on in that child's life that created vulnerabilities that the trafficker exploited. Some of those things may be because of the abuse and neglect in the home, where a child will look at you and say, this is bad, but my home was worse. And in some situations, it actually may have been worse. There may have been significant ongoing sexual abuse going on in the home. There may have been significant neglect in the home. So do not assume that the home is safe. Now, some of the things that may be exploited is naivete, may be bullying at school. There may be other factors that are involved, but do not assume that the home is safe. Do not assume that the home can really keep that child protected, because we have had multiple cases where the family is not the trafficker, but they effectively sold the child to the trafficker. So when you go into that, that's not we're good. You have to evaluate the home environment. You have to evaluate their protective capacities. You have to evaluate what is actually in the best interest of the child. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a preview. This is the first slide that does this. These are some of the steps that will be laid out shortly in policy about when we assess the home environment. Was there anything that facilitated the ACV's decision to leave the home if they are a runaway? What was going on there? Did the family permit the alleged perpetrator access to the child? Is there any indication of active or passive? It may be that they didn't actively allow this, but they know about it and they don't care that this person is exploiting the child. So take those things into consideration. That protective capacity and the ability to care for the child, not just absent the trafficking incident, but now with the complex trauma and the other issues that are going on in this child's life. What are some of the restrictions that need to go into place around telephone, computer, social media? We have put a child back in a home, and the child picked up the phone, called their trafficker, and the trafficker came to the home and just picked the child back up. There needs to be a more full assessment of safety and a safety plan put in place in that home. Medicals are important, and it's more than just gathering information. You know, if somebody is exiting this situation, a question that is lurking in their mind that they may not verbalize but is there is, am I okay? They know that they've been exploited for sex. They know that there's been physical violence. There's been excuses that have been foisted upon them by their trafficker through that trauma bonding process. But just going to a doctor, being medically checked out, and having that knowledge, even if everything's not okay right then, they can be put on a path. Is there a prescription that needs to be filled out so that an STI can be addressed? Are they, meeting developmental milestones or getting good nutrition? What are those things? So a medical is more than just gathering evidence. There can be a lot of great evidence that comes out of that, documenting marks and bruises, documenting number of sexual encounters, even if we're not getting names yet. There may be physical evidence of the sexual encounters. So there is that evidentiary component, but that peace of mind piece cannot be overlooked. They're also able to build rapport. Even though we work very closely with our child abuse pediatricians, our SANE nurses, and the CACs that provide medicals, unlike law enforcement, unlike the CACs, and sometimes even unlike the anti-trafficking organizations, the doctors are seen as a neutral third party. You know, we've all seen ER and the other TV shows. This is somebody that I can trust. This is somebody whose job is to take care of people. And they see that more clearly than they see us in that role. So there are times that the ability to build rapport with that medical provider can also assist with reducing trauma of the entire situation and building that trust level. You are not alone in this. There is a lot that goes on. I've seen some of the names of our participants. I know some of you have worked some very hard cases in this area. Partnering is going to be the one way that keeps you sane in this. Sometimes it can feel like herding cats because there are a lot of people that can get involved and they're not always talking to each other. I know that there are more local work groups, not just grand regional work groups, where people are coming together and trying to not staff cases per se, but really figure out what is the way that we can work better together. So that's a way of bringing up some of these issues, not to throw anybody under the bus, of going, well, this is what didn't go well in this situation. Here's what went well in this other situation. How do we get into that better practice area more frequently? So if you are passionate about this topic, please join those local work groups so that your concerns, your voice can and ideas can be heard. We do have a number of trainings. You do not have to write these down.
Showing a graphic listing several Edison trainings related to human trafficking.
This actually will go into Edison itself as a training, but there are a number of trainings that if you search in Edison around human trafficking, and we're going to actually submit another one, hopefully by the middle of summer, that is more comprehensive on the DCS components of it. But these are a lot of resources that are currently available to you to raise awareness, to gather more information, to get some insights on survivorship and the issues around human trafficking. Here's the second preview. There is a policy that has been out on policy review. It has, I believe it's ended that, and so it is in the final stages of review with the commissioner. It's policy 31.10. So this will apply to all program areas. Once this goes into effect, I foresee that WorkAid 9 will go away because it incorporates a lot of the tasks and the guidance in there. It does emphasize that collaboration coordination that I've been stressing through this. It mandates referrals in certain circumstances and requires follow-up. So there will be specific tasks that have to be done on these cases, and one of the driving factors of that are going to be the fast in the cans output. So if there is a risk of trafficking, We may not have identification or disclosure. There are tasks that are associated with that. If there is identification and disclosure, there are tasks associated with that. So we are going to be more tightly connecting it and having the workflow of your global assessment, informal assessment in the field, feeding these tools, and those outputs, which look at a lot of the risk factors that put a child at risk for trafficking. What do we do with that? It also applies that social media and internet, telephone access to all the program areas, stressing that home may not be safe or home may need to look a little different, as well as custodial and non-custodial placements. We need to be taking these things into consideration on the front end rather than potentially having a child run away or using these methods to contact their trafficker and going back into the life. So I'm going to pause there. I see that there's some movement in this chat box. If you do have questions, please put them there and we will address them. Dale says one of the things we've seen in these cases are the runaway children, but the parent did not file runaway petitions for the child, have used this as a basis for not allowing the child to go back into the home. It is something to consider. Why didn't they? They knew their child was not at home. What steps did they take to try to recover? What red flags did they send up and saying, hey, this is a problem? So it's definitely part of that safety consideration of, do they even care about the well-being of this child? Do they care about the safety of this child? Because child's gone, and they haven't called law enforcement. They haven't reached out and said, we've got a problem here. I have no clue where my child is. Other questions, comments, case examples? If not, we've put in the chat box, sorry, Ashley, thank you. With children with no identification, what are some suggestions to verify their ages? You can use medical providers. You can also use a dentist to help age a child. The development of their teeth is an indication. I know that nutrition and malnutrition can affect that, but we can get a better idea of age range using and leaning on our medical and dental partners. You may, especially if that child's coming into custody, they will have to have an EPS-DNT, which includes a dental. So that may be something that we need to flag for when we transition to foster care, that we really need somebody that can assist us with that when they're doing their scans. Have that in mind. And even if your local dentist can't do it, we can liaise with a forensic dentist, and they can use some of that information to give us an age range. Before Ashley asked that, I did copy and paste in the hyperlink. Use that to go and get training credit for this Fireside chat. Question about what if TBI and Slavery and others do not stay in contact with us regarding the cases? We need to reach out to them and leave them messages, voicemails. If you're still not getting contact, do send that up. Your directors are involved with them. I meet consistently with them. So if we're having a communication issue, do elevate that up so that we can sort through that. Last call for questions. All right, thank you everyone for joining this morning. Do keep your eyes peeled. There will be an announcement when the new training comes out related to the updated and new Chapter 31 policy. If you do have questions about human trafficking, I do encourage you to participate in your local work groups, as well as internally you can escalate those up through your supervision chain or come directly to me, and we will sort through those situations. These are highly complex cases. We often have more questions than we have answers, particularly on the front end. So you're not, again, out there alone. There are professional partners in the community and resources internally that we can leverage to assist you with working these cases. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you everyone for joining, and please do use that hyperlink